Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the classic original 62 book series. And it's book number 32, The Barking Ghost. Now, looking through my videos, I just realized that I'm exactly halfway through the original 62 series by now, and it's taken me a while. And if you haven't been watching the past few reviews, I've been stuck in a rut of books I'm just not a fan of. Now, you might be asking, well, if you've been stuck in a rut, why did you pick The Barking Ghost? Well, The Barking Ghost and I have a weird past, right? When I was a kid, I remember I picked up the book one time from the library. I got to page like 88 or 89, and I stopped there. And I never finished the book because I was like, this book is just going places I just don't care to find out where it's going to go. And years later, when I got this book, collecting, I kind of thumbed through the ending a little bit just to see what happens in the story. And I was like, oh man, it's going to be a doozy by the time I get to review this book. Now, sitting down, reading this book fully in one sitting for the first time in my life, I can tell you that all of the buzz that you constantly hear about this book, from it being one of R.L. Stine's least favorite Goosebumps books, from it being a well-knownly hated Goosebumps book, I totally see why. This book is not good whatsoever. And if you want to know my opinion before we go any further, this book is stuck in existential crisis of what it's trying to be. I have never read a Goosebumps book where it goes through so many tropes in one book, but can't settle on one by the ending. But by the ending, it's not even what these tropes are setting up. It is so mind-blowing that R.L. Stine wrote this book. In a lot of ways, it doesn't feel like he actually wrote this. And I want to be shocked if he didn't. But given that he said that he's not impressed by this and has alluded that he's written this book, yeah, this could be one of R.L. Stine's off days. But it's painful. It's a painful book. I'll probably never reread this book again. So if you're looking for a recommendation from me, you're not getting it from me. So yeah, there's that. So I guess let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So the story starts off with a kid named Cooper, and he has moved to a brand new town in Maine from the big city of Boston, Massachusetts. And he's reflecting on this to the reader in his monologue, which is mildly decent. And he's talking about, him in his past in Boston and, how he's a Red Sox fan and how he misses his two best friends that he used to hang out with in the city. And he also talks about how he gets scared kind of easily. And living out in the woods in Maine has kind of brought that out of him. And the story kind of kicks on when one night he's being pranked by his older brother named Mickey. And Mickey's 3 years older than him. And there's a jump scare moment where he leaps from under his bed and like chokes him or something like that. And Mickey and Cooper get into a fist fight. And it wakes up their parents, and it's revealed that they're going to be starting a new school within the next week. And they need to stop fighting or they're going to be grounded when school starts. So Mickey, he's kind of the typical jerk character you see in these Goosebumps books. And you understand why Cooper doesn't like him, right? But after they're done fighting and Cooper's kind of dwelling at night listening to the noises, he hears dogs barking. And he doesn't know what to make of this because where he lives, he doesn't really know his neighbors. He doesn't know that there are neighbors nearby or anything that have dogs. And his family doesn't own dogs because his mom is allergic. So he's pondering, like, where are these dogs coming from? Why are they so close to the house? Is anybody else hearing these dogs? And he carries it over to the next day and he brings it up to his family. He's like, hey, has anybody heard these dogs? And they're like, oh, no, we haven't heard anything. So Cooper's like, okay, well, I'm going to do some investigating on my own and go out into the woods and explore. So he goes out into the woods and he gets lost. And Cooper, like I said, in his monologue, he talks about how he gets scared very easily. And he's contemplating on which direction to go. And he goes in one direction thinking that, if the direction takes him to a whole different place, he can just double back and go the opposite way. Well, while he's walking, he feels like he's being followed and stalked. And he keeps having these visions, or perceived visions that maybe there's these two black labs following him. And he gets creeped out a little bit. And the noises get, heavier and droops in closer. And he gets, stopped by somebody. And it's this girl who reveals herself to be named Fergie. Well, her name is Margaret, but she goes by the surname Fergie because her last name is Ferguson. So Fergie is this weird chick. She has red hair and she's kind of crazy looking. But Cooper, while talking to her, gets this feeling that something's off because Fergie keeps bringing up these dogs and saying that, the former owners in your house, something bad happened to them and you just need to get out of town while you can. And Cooper's like, well, what do you mean about these dogs? Because at this point, Cooper's the only one that thinks he hears these dogs. And Fergie's like, well, I didn't say anything about dogs. What are you talking about? And Cooper's kind of dumbfounded by Fergie's response. And then Fergie's like, well, I got to get out of here. She tries to bolt and Cooper tries to follow her. And then they have some, parting words. And Fergie ends up going back towards the direction of her house. And Cooper decides to turn around and head back the other way because he went the wrong direction. And on the way back, he has these visions of these dogs again. And they're chasing after him through the woods. They're biting at his ankle. And he makes his way to his backyard and he's screaming for his dad to help. His dad's like, what's wrong? And he's like, these dogs. There's these dogs and I've heard them and I've now seen them. They've tried to attack me. And the dad's like, why don't you sit down and calm down, and tries to talk to Cooper about it. And Cooper tries to get his dad to believe him, but the dad hasn't seen any evidence of it. And his brother Mickey and his mom overhear it later on at dinner. And Cooper's not in the mood to talk about it. But Mickey makes fun of him about, this paranoia about dogs and being easy to scare. And his mom's like, well, maybe you should lay off with him, Mickey. He's having trouble with the move. And Mickey's like, he's just trying to come up with all this stuff so we can move back to Boston so he can be around his nerdy group of friends. And this upsets Cooper, but he is determined to get to the bottom of this dog business. Well, he has this interaction one night where he thinks he hears something downstairs and he decides to check it out. And it ends up being his brother, who's downstairs just making a lot of noise, eating some food. And there's this whole altercation that the parents have to break up and, things carry over until like a day or two later, when one day Fergie comes over to his house to visit. And Fergie really wants to talk to Cooper and come clean about something that she hasn't told him yet. And Fergie essentially drops the bombshell saying that she was convinced by Mickey to pull this prank on Cooper and say that the woods are haunted and to leave town while you can. And Cooper's like, well, you brought up these dogs. What about the dogs? And she's like, I don't remember saying that. And he's like, well, I swear you did, right? So this kind of tells the reader that Cooper's going through some type of paranoia. Maybe he's making up this whole thing. Maybe he's fabricating this in his mind, right? But Fergie tells him that she believes him and that maybe they should kind of work together to get to the bottom of it, but also to get revenge on Mickey. So the two of them decide to go into the woods and they go to this hangout spot that Fergie takes them to. And they come up with this plan to uproot some weeds to put in Mickey's bed. But Mickey kind of spoils the plan and scares the two of them. And Mickey laughs and Cooper's upset that, this plan's not going to work. But Fergie's like, well, we'll keep at it and let's see what happens. Well, Cooper, of course, has another run-in with these visions of these dogs. He keeps thinking that he's seeing himself as a dog. It gets kind of bizarre. And Fergie and her family have now, eaten dinner with his family a couple times, invited them over to their house. And this carries over into the first week of school, right? And the weekend of the first week of school, once that comes to fruition, Fergie decides to sleep over at Cooper's house, and they come up with this plan to get back at Mickey. Now, the plan is to sneak into Mickey's room and get him in trouble by scaring him and making him think that these dogs, ghost dog things that Cooper thinks he sees, are real. But Cooper's like, well, I got a better idea. And they decided, instead of doing that, they go after this black rat, which is like a stuffed rat, and they tie it to a string, and they want to scare him like that. So Fergie tries to park herself in the closet, but she accidentally steps on a skateboard and almost wakes Mickey up. And then the two of them get jump scared while they're trying to hide to avoid detection from Mickey. That essentially reveals that Mickey was eavesdropping on their conversation the whole time and knew that they were trying this plan and that it's never going to work against him. So the two kids realize that they're pretty much SOL. They're not going to be able to scare Mickey. But they had this suspicion that these dogs are somehow out there and that maybe Cooper's not all that crazy. So Cooper gets the bright idea to tell Fergie, hey, let's, try not to forget this, but let's go out and try to see if we can find these dogs. If we can find that the dogs are real, maybe we can salvage some of this and kind of show my parents that, I'm kind of telling the truth. So Fergie and Cooper go out into the woods. And of course they get, stopped by these dogs, right? And the dogs start grabbing them and dragging them to this shack out in the middle of the woods. And they get pretty much shoved in there. And the next thing they know, when they come to, it's the morning. And they're now these black Labrador dogs. And this is where the story goes from here. So the two of them are... I don't want to spoil part of it, because I kind of glanced over it, but there's a sense that these dogs that have been following Cooper have a tie to the past and maybe were once human. I'm just going to leave it at that. And now, in today's time, they're essentially ghost dogs that have, have an entity where they can swap out with other people. And that's as far as I'll go with that. But now Fergie and Cooper are now bestowed the curse of being dogs. And they are first, mortified, and that they have these dog mannerisms, like they think they feel fleas all over them. They have these, acute sense of smell. They want to have a ravenous appetite, stuff like that. But they can communicate telepathically. But when they make sounds, all people hear is barking. I'm not making this up. And they get this bright idea to go get their bodies back. So when they go back to Cooper's house, they call themselves Bogus Cooper and Bogus Fergie, or they're imitating them. And they have to go pretty much throughout the entire later half of the book trying to get their bodies back. And in doing so, they're able to kind of scare Mickey in a lot of ways, because they use their ghost dog powers to make their presence known to the family to prove that Cooper's not crazy, and Mickey gets some comeuppance there. Well, it comes to a point where these two fake kids are put into a dilemma that the book kind of drops about one of Cooper's favorite meals, and fake Cooper doesn't like it, but the real Cooper does, and that kind of raises some hairs. And the two of them keep trying to do these plans to convince his parents that it's them as the dogs, but they keep failing to recognize that they're dogs, and they can't vocally communicate, so they have to go through all this hoops and hurdles and trying to, stand and show them that, they're trying to act human, but it doesn't work. So they get the bright idea to just grab them, the imposters, and try to drag them out of the house, and it causes this big old escapade. And the family follows the dogs with imposter Fergie and Cooper out to the woods into the shack. And this is where the climax of the story happens. And let's just say, the real Cooper and Fergie try to shove them into the shack to get their bodies back. But the ending itself implies that that may or may not have happened. With a potential new layer to it. Let's just say it like that. And that's where the story ends. So that in a nutshell is the barking ghost. Now, I'm going to be honest, y'all. I have little to no positives with this book. But if I did have one positive with this story, I think the first 30 pages are serviceable. I do like Cooper's monologue early on in the story. He does get repetitive. He does get kind of stereotypical and one note where he's just scared about everything and he just doesn't like his older brother because his brother is a jerk. We've seen this done countless of times in Goosebumps. Cooper and Mickey's relationship is no different. But what I like about it is that it's setting up this fish out of water trope where Cooper is new in this new town. There may be a local legend that he's not familiar with that has to do with these dogs out in the middle of the woods. And there's a lot of mystery yet to be had about it. So for that, for like the first 30 so pages, it was fine. But after that is where the story completely derails. And I brought this up earlier. I think this book is in a perpetual existential crisis of what it's trying to be. On one hand, you have a trope about a fish out of water, moving into a new town, a potential local urban legend. You know, you don't know anything about this mysterious dog barking going on. What becomes of that? Well, as the story goes on, it changes from that to a revenge story kind of trope, where Fergie and Cooper want to plan revenge on Mickey, which is understandable, but it kind of drops the urban legend aspect, and it just kind of just trickles on throughout the story. And then once you get to a certain point, it's no longer the trope of being a fish out of water. It's no longer dealing with urban legends, a local urban legend. It's no longer dealing with revenge, even. It just derails completely. After like page 80 or so, it goes nonsensical route. And not to mention, it did get prank heavy and repetitive with the pranks, but that the last third of this book is a train wreck. And I'm not exaggerating this. It is awful. Absolutely awful. And one of the most infamous things about this book, people will tell you, is that the whole changing shed thing, shack, whatever you want to call it, is so left field in the story that it completely detracts everything that came before it in the book, because it makes it, everything really don't matter. And not to mention that there's no context behind it at all either, but besides the context issue, the delivery of it is absolutely atrocious. And it's just a cluster of randomness. And it makes everything before it feel like padding, repetitive filler, which it is inherently on its own, but it just makes it stand out even more for that, right? It makes the book feel pointless. Especially by the ending, and I'm going to talk about the ending really briefly here because I don't want to spoil it, but the ending has to be one of the worst Goosebumps endings of all time. Straight up. And I'm not lying. If you've read this book, and maybe if you even like this book, I'd be shocked if people think that ending is good. I'm at a loss for words. Now, part of the reason why the ending is so bad is because it potentially involves Fergie and Cooper getting this forced moral play about revenge put on them. Which, you know, it's common in Goosebumps when you see forced morals, right? You know, like revenge is bad. You see it in a couple of Goosebumps books, and they do it way worse than this. But it's still equally dissatisfying to see it here as in those books. And yeah, nothing about the ending works, in my opinion. But stemming from that, I think every single character in this book is a detriment to it. The parents, I mean, they start off good, but then, you know, they become so inconsequential to the story where they probably should have been, that they don't really help the situation, because they clearly don't parent their kids good. Because Mickey is one of the worst sibling characters in all of Goosebumps. He's just a really big pukehead of a kid. He's just constantly picking on his little brother for seemingly no reason other than boredom. And Cooper, as a result, while he's sympathetic, he's very annoying in his monologue because he's constantly talking about being scared. And, you know, a lot of people can attribute Cooper's character to having anxiety. And I do think that Stein was going for an anxious character archetype here. Not as good as Bean from How I Met My Monster or anything, but I could see the direction he was going for. But Cooper is just annoying, right? And it's because he has a terrible relationship with his older brother, and he's constantly seeking revenge against him, that we don't really get to see Cooper grow in the story. He doesn't evolve. He doesn't develop whatsoever. And part of that is his relationship with Fergie, too. And Fergie is not only an inconsequential character, but her reveal in the story, her part working with Mickey, is so random and recontextualizes a good portion of the book beforehand. But not putting that aside, Fergie is a weird character in herself, right? She clearly brings up that she hears these dogs early on, and then she pretends like she didn't say it. And then she convinces herself she didn't say it, but then believes Cooper about the dogs, and then she gets involved with Cooper and the dogs later on. It's just so unnecessarily convoluted with her character, and she just comes off confusing. And she has some moments where you just straight up dislike her. Getting down to the main villains of the story, the ghosts, the barking ghosts, right? They are really confusing. There's no explanation behind why they are ghost dogs, besides this little paragraph that explains the lore of these dogs, and I'm not going to spoil it. When I brought up that these dogs may have once been human, let's just leave it at that. It has something to do with a presumed curse, but they're ghost dogs, right? So when Cooper and Fergie become these ghost dogs, they have ghost fleas, they have ghost appetites, they can phase their bodies through walls and stuff, but they cause physical damage, which in most stories involving ghosts can't really do that. There is some suspense of disbelief you're going to have with this story dealing with these dogs, but man, none of this stuff makes sense. The whole changing shed, let's put that into perspective. How did this become a thing? Who's the person that put the curse to make this happen? None of that's explained. It's all just completely drove over. Bulldozed over by Stein. He does not care whatsoever to explain any of this stuff. And it honestly makes it come across that you don't really have to care about this. Like, you're reading this and you're like, okay, so why should I care? Right? Why should I care that these people were cursed by a dog? Cursed to be ghost dogs. There's no reason to care. So when Cooper and Fergie become these ghost dogs, none of that makes sense. I can't stress it to you. You know, I feel like I'm kind of rambling on now. But I cannot stress it to you. The delivery of the final third of this book is atrocious. When it comes to context, when it comes to how all this stuff has come to be, all of it. Whether we're talking the tone, the silliness, how far out there it goes, it's all terrible, right? And this book is a prime example of a terrible Goosebumps book, in my opinion. I mean, there's nothing really salvageable here. And it's sad. This is a Goosebumps book, right? You have an awesome cover here, done by Tim Jacobus. But the inside of the book is as ugly as can be. Right? This cover's beautiful, but the inside is ugly, right? You know, it's an ugly duckling, right? The first 30 pages showed that it had a potential, but it just never got itself out of first gear. It was trying so hard to put the pedal to the metal that it just started flailing all over the road and got lost in its smoke cloud that its tires were creating. It's a messy book. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, for all the problems I said collectively, I deducted 3 points flat. And I gave this book like a 2 out of 5 stars. This is the highest F tier I can give because I only do 0.5 increments for F tiers because I just don't care to do exact numbers. It's not the worst thing in Goosebumps. I do think that I would read the first 30 pages of this over something like Dr. Maniac Will See You Now, the entire book. But this is a rough book, y'all. And I'm being straight up. This is not going to recommend from me. And if this is your first video of mine you ever watch, and you maybe have never read a Goosebumps book, please do not read this as your first Goosebumps book. But if you do, I could see some people maybe digging this if this was one of their earlier books because they just don't know what to expect with the series. But all across the board, I think this is one of Stein's worst written books I've read from him that I've known that he's written. And this is just one of my least favorite Goosebumps books ever. It might be in the bottom 10 when I get to that point after reading through all of these. I don't know. But it's down there. So yeah, that's my thoughts on The Barking Ghost. Let me know down in the comment section. Do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.